Hey now, and how are you doing? Want to welcome you to the next episode of Peace, Love, and Bring a Bat. Today we bring on an author, but not just an author. I'm going to say a hero. I'm going to go as far as to say, because what he did, Ira Kohler had actually gone to Israel to be a volunteer, to be something that's called a lone soldier, which means that he didn't have any family there at the time, but he went there to do what he felt he needed to do. And then he wrote a book, which we'll talk a little bit about. But how are you doing today, Ira?
I'm doing amazing, David. Thank you for having me on your podcast. It's really a pleasure and an honor to be here.
Okay, well, thank you, and it's an honor to talk to you. Thank you for your service.
Thank you.
People, I really, especially under the circumstances, you're an American citizen, you are an American citizen, and you went back to go back. So I guess the first question is, why would you put yourself in that situation?
Yeah, so first of all, David, I'll take a step back because
Sure.
we were talking a little bit about before the show. I grew up in New York on Long Island. David, you're from
Yep.
Massapequa. I'm from Plainview. Any Long Island listeners, or even if you're a geography nerd, Long Island, Plainview, and Massapequa, about 10 minutes apart from each other.
Yep.
We didn't know each other. I grew up in Plainview, Long Island, really in the heart of the Jewish community. I grew up going to Midway Jewish Center, which is a very prominent synagogue on Long Island. Very involved there. Went to a Jewish day school too growing up. I went to the Schechter School of Long Island, which is a
Oh,
Jewish
okay.
day school in Nassau County. Also very involved in like Jewish summer camp, went every year to the Young Judea camps. And I say this all to kind of set the scene of my upbringing. I truly grew up in the heart of the Jewish world, where I learned that Judaism and like connection to Israel isn't going to be just a part of who I am. It's the true essence of who I am. Like who is Ira
Mm.
Kohler? I'm a Jew, and I love the fact that we as Jews now have a home in the world, and that home is Israel. When I grew older, a thought started to take shape, and I thought a lot about moving to Israel and serving in the IDF. And for your listeners who might not know what the Israeli military, the IDF, the Israel Defense Forces, what is, right? It's a military that protects Israel, but what's so unique about Israel is because in 1948, Israel was created on May 14th. The next day, May 15th, a war broke out. And Israel was immediately fighting its enemies. And there was it was a sense of duty from the start that there's actually mandatory military service in Israel, where every man and woman needs to serve. And so I'm growing up in America, non-Israeli citizen, but a proud Jew. And I say, how is it that every Israeli for the last 70 plus years had to go put on uniform, take a gun, learn to shoot and protect the country? And I'm a Jew that so happened to have been born outside of Israel. Why is it that I don't have the responsibility to go serve? And
Mm.
when I was in college, I really started to take this thought that I had started to take shape, and the decision was made in my mind. I said, I'm doing this. I'm going to Israel. I'm going to serve, and I'm going to protect our homeland.
That is awesome. I didn't know that, and man, that is great. And I know when you feel how deeply it is within you, you don't change. It becomes a drawing. I mean, I know you were surprised that I haven't been to Israel yet, but it's a drawing, and now I'm in a position in my life where I need to go there. Like it's
Yeah.
not a hey, it's a nice to go. Let me check off something on a bucket list. There's a need, and all the talents that I've gathered over the years, I know that I can, and I told you I'm looking for the volunteers, the Sword of Iron, to do volunteering, not to just go and be a tourist. I want to make sure I participate in my, not only my religion, which I do, but the helping of our country. And hearing you really inspired me. I wanted to really, I didn't know any of
I
that part.
appreciate it. Yeah, I listen, I Israel to me isn't just, let's go on vacation and let's look let's choose a place and go there. Israel is not a vacation spot. You're going home, and for every Jew in the world, even if you've been there a million times, if you have family there, or if you've never been there, it's not just going on vacation to to Europe or to Asia. You're going to the place that we came from, the home of our people. I also want to share just a little bit about, my belief system. I truly believe every person deserves a home and a home to say, I'm gonna come back to, and this is mine. And I can go travel anywhere in the world, but I have a place that knows me, that loves me, and that place is my home. Just like that, every people deserve to have a home, a place where their culture could flourish, they could speak their language, and a place where, you as a people could say, this is ours. This is, this belongs to us. And as Jews, for 2,000 years, we didn't have a home. We were kicked out of the land that is now Israel in the year 70, in this year 70, when the Romans came and destroyed the Second Temple, kicked the Jews out. And for 2,000 years, the Jews have been saying, we want to come home, and we didn't have a home. We were scattered throughout the world. And in 1948, finally, after nearly 2,000 years, the Jews have a home. And to be living in, the 20th and 21st, second half of the 20th century and the 23rd century, where we have a home, I can say how lucky we are. And I actually write it out in my book in chapter one. I say this quote, how lucky are we to be living in a time where Israel exists? How lucky are we that if God forbid something happens around the world, if people want to kill Jews just like they did in the Holocaust, we have a place to go. We have an army that will protect us, and it's incredible.
That that's amazing. I mean, I gotta say, the more I talk to you, the more motivated and focused that I personally get. It really is. And the book that Ira had mentioned is called "Once a Paratrooper: The Story of a Lone Soldier in the Gaza War," which we'll get into a little bit more. But that's a great way to start for those who don't understand really why Israel's as important as it is for our country, right, for the United States, but also all the reasons why. We've always been as Jews. The story has always been you're not welcome here, and that's all the stories I've heard about Israel is everybody who comes is welcome.
Yeah.
You know,
Well,
we
little facts that your listeners might not know. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. Israel has about 75, 80% of the country is Jewish, and about 20, 25% of the country is not Jewish. And that other quarter is consisted of Muslims, Christians, the Druze, not Jews, Druze, Druze, Bedouins, and a myriad of other different faiths and ethnicities. It's a country that is it's a Jewish country because it's a place that our culture can flourish and our language can be spoken and our history can be written to ourselves. But it's also a country that's not only for Jews. And there's many other different types of people who live in Israel.
Yeah, no, and that's what it is. I mean, and remember, that's where I always talk to people. Uh, it was a desert. It is not a desert now. Yeah, it's still a desert.
Yeah,
Go out of the cities, but how they were able to cultivate the land and build some of the most iconic places to do that, now, not, since 1948.
yeah,
That's what also gets left out. There's companies, think of all the top companies in the world. Many of them, have started there. I mean, the top generic company in the world is Teva, and which is a Israeli. I'm
yeah.
not necessarily a fan of Teva, but that's a different, not because they're
Pharmaceuticals.
Israeli, but um, but you want to know they're the top
Yeah,
generic company in the world, and
yeah,
they deserve that credit to do that because there's opportunities. Some of the biggest tech companies are based out of Israel.
yeah. And the innovation in the country over 78 years is phenomenal. You took a country, as you said, that was barren. It was a country that was wasn't built up in over 78 years. The infrastructure in the country, the technology, all the companies that have sprouted from the little nothing in 78 years is incredible.
Yeah, 100%. Um, so I guess what you explained to us is also it was a decision in 2021. It was almost like your next life progression.
Yeah.
It wasn't like, oh, I'm doing this. I got nothing better to do. It was actually, I mean, you went to college. You were at the University of Delaware. So it wasn't
Yes. So
that you just couldn't do anything and all right, I'll do this. I have this.
yeah.
This was something deep in your bones that it was
Yeah,
you know
and just for some context, like I obviously, th this type of decision isn't and should never be a decision that just a spur of the moment decision. It should be one that's well thought. Obviously, I I left my home in America. I moved to Israel and I enlisted in a foreign military from America. I became a citizen of Israel, so I'm a dual citizen. I'm an Israeli citizen and an American citizen, and I enlisted in the military to protect the country. It's not something that you just make a spur of the moment decision, but it's something that I cared and thought so deeply about that actually when I was 18, 19 years old, my freshman year of college, and I was just starting out. I was like, I can't be here. I need to go surf. And I told my parents, I want to leave college. I don't want to be here anymore. And they yelled at me. They said, don't do that. Stay and graduate first. We understand why you want to go. We understand, our love for Israel and to protect the country, but finish her degree. And so I ended up finishing my degree actually in 3 years instead of 4 years. And then at the end of those 3 years, I was like,
I'm
I'm
out.
still going.
No.
I'm going to Israel. And so I graduated in May. And then that August of 21, I moved to Israel. And from there, it was history.
Yeah, well, I guess how did your parents react? Obviously, they were supportive, probably
Yes,
concerned as a parent, I could
for
imagine,
sure.
but obviously very supportive as well.
So my mom's a Jewish mom. That's first of all. So she was not happy with that decision in the sense that no mother ever wants to send their child to uh
Right, a war-torn
military.
country.
Yeah, military, and also I want to do combat. So it's like what you're going to Israel to enlist in the military, and you're gonna need a combat unit. Like what are you getting? And mind you, this is all way before October 7th. These conversations were from 2018, 19, 20,
Right,
21
this is all prior to the
to
current.
October 7th, 2023. And like these are prior conversations. No idea there's gonna be a war, but obviously the thought that a war could happen. And so they understood it. Like they understood where I was coming from. And one of the things that they told me, right, they said, please wait till you finish college and then go. And I know that in their mind, they hoped that he'll go to college for a few years, he'll continue, and by the time he graduates, maybe this is just gonna be like a blimp in his thought. Like, he'll grow out of it per
Yeah.
se. And so I wasn't gonna let that happen. And I'll say part of it is that during those few years when I was in college, I picture myself in Israel. I picture myself having moved there, having enlisted in the IDF, having been in a uniform just like the ones I saw on a screen, and the friends that I met were in the IDF. I picture myself just like them. And when you imagine yourself in that role, it's almost like you're like realizing it
Yep.
with the word happening.
Right.
And so
I mean, that's how, when I do motivational speaking and things like that, you have to see
yeah,
where you're going. And
yeah.
you were already living there. That was my question. So how many times had you been to Israel prior?
So it's a good question. I went to Israel 3 times before I was 18. When I was 6 years old, 9 years old, and 15. And then when I was 18, I went twice. And then actually, when I told you so. I just had to graduate college in 3 years instead of four.
Yeah.
And I told my parents, I said, I'm gonna spend a semester in Israel because I want to do some college there, and maybe it's a good test to see like how much do I like being
Mm,
there, and then decide. So I went to Israel in beginning of January of 2020, and then I was actually only there for like 2.5 months because Corona
yep.
started.
Yep.
So I came home in the middle of the semester instead of coming home in June. I came home in March, but that was then I guess my sixth time in Israel, and then I went back again.
All right.
Um,
So
but now
you've
I
really
was
taken
definitely
on. Yeah.
yeah, I definitely spent a lot of time there prior
Yeah,
to
that's awesome. And because you took, you really investigated, by taking that semester and, living there. That was the first time that you lived there when you took that semester?
yes, that was the first time that was not just a trip.
Right,
If that
right.
makes sense. Like in the sense that I had to get a student visa, and it wasn't just a few weeks. The longest time I was there before was a 3-week trip. So in 3 weeks, it's not a short time, but it's
Yeah,
not living there.
right.
And,
It's
and I
still not
and I
living there.
and I will say even the semester is not living there because you're in an international program. So you're kind of in this bubble
Yeah,
of, you make your way outside of the international program when you go into the city and when you travel to different places. But at the end of the day, you're not in Israel. You're in the bubble of Israel, and really being in the IDF, like serving and being with Israelis, actually doing the thing that they do is like I'm not gonna say it's the most Israeli thing to do, but I will say if for me it was the most Israeli thing that I've done.
sure. Yeah, no, that makes sense. And so, okay, so you made that decision. How does
Yeah.
one do that? Like to go to Israel and to, as you said, join a foreign arm.
Yeah. So the way it works is Israel, I was actually talking about this with someone recently. It's such a crazy concept because there's probably no other military in the world with so many people from abroad that come to that country to serve it. It's just not like a concept that works anywhere else, which makes the IDF really special and unique. There's this program called Garin Sadar.
Mhm.
It's a program that essentially assists individuals like me to move from abroad, go to Israel, enlist in the IDF, and how to start our entire process. So I applied to this program called Garin Sabar, and what's great about them is that they basically hold your hand through everything. And they navigate the Israeli bureaucracy, the IDF bureaucracy, they do it all. So the moment I applied to them, I got in contact, had some interviews, got accepted to the program. Then I had interviews already with people from like the States and representatives from the IDF just to get my foot in the door and where they basically can say, okay, you're making Aliyah, which means you're moving to Israel, and you get registered in the system of being in the IDF. And then with all of that, I then moved to Israel and began the whole process of the enlistment process, which is about a 3, 4 month period for me. That includes all the different tests and um, or whatever
Yeah,
before you actually enlist.
yeah, all the logistical pieces of that.
Yeah, you got to be essentially what's it called when you get accepted to a job, then before you actually start the job,
Yeah, the
there's all the
orientation. Yeah, the orientation
or you have
period.
to go through a background check and do
Yep.
all of
Oh yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah. They do all the back end stuff. Yep.
So all of that. And then I moved to Israel in August of 21, and then I enlisted the very beginning in January 4th of 2022.
Wow.
Yeah.
And how did the transition go?
So the
But
transition,
you knew people. So did you know people in that enlistment class that were
yes.
starting, or they were already more advanced because of the requirements, the country requirements?
So it's a good question. So first of all, I went through this program, as I mentioned, called Garin Samar. This is all before I enlisted in the IDF. This program, we were 17 in my group, because there were different groups in this program. My specific group, we were 17 individuals from North America. And we all actually lived together in Israel in the same community. And together we essentially prepared to enlist in the IDF, they go into different units. So we lived together, all were enlisting into the IDF, but into the different units that we were going into. And then when I enlisted, I went to the paratroopers. And so when I became a paratrooper, it works by draft classes. So everyone who I enlisted with, it was their first day in the paratroopers as well. It wasn't that, they'd been there for a few months, they'd been there for a few years, and I just started. It's not like a job in that sense. We all start in the same draft class, and then we become a team. And our team then goes through training for 8 months. And obviously, we have commanders and officers that have been spent, that are more senior in the
Right.
IDF, and they went through training and officers and commanders course and all officers through officers course. But the those in my team and my were those in my draft class, and we went through training together and everything.
Wow. So, but and that also, I mean, starts building you friendships, family, really, excuse me, people that you rely on.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
like the people you meet are crazy and amazing in the sense that everything was new to me. Next thing you know, you're living in I was in college in America, and now I'm in the IDF in the paratroopers on a team where we were about 30 or 40 guys, and we're just, people from all over the country, different types of people, like different types of Israelis. They're not cookie cutter. They're all different, and it's not easy in the beginning, but over time they really became true like brothers.
Yeah,
And
yeah, yeah. At the beginning, it's always odd, just putting yourself with strangers who then eventually become family. Now, did
yeah,
you choose to be a paratrooper, or that's where they chose? You chose?
it's a really good question. So I chose to be a paratrooper. I always say there's two decisions. One is if you're a lone soldier. One is you want to go serve. Okay, that's the first decision. Well, then the next thing is, well, then where exactly are you going to go serve? Because you can go and do a bunch of different types of roles. Some are less intensive and some are more intensive. I, from the start, said I want to be a pirate. I want to be in combat. And with that, it's then, okay, well, which combat unit do you want to be in? And I particularly want to be in an infantry unit. I want to be a foot soldier. I want to be the classic, you carry your equipment, you have a gun, you walk for kilometers on end, which is, very typical, idea soldier, very standard. And there's five main infantry brigades in the IDF, and I was kind of between two of them. One of them is called Nachal, and the other one is the paratroopers. And what's a little bit special about the paratroopers is that the other basic units, the basic infantry units, you put in like a request and you rank them. You say, I want to be in this unit first, this unit second, this unit third, and then it goes to it's a commander that basically sorts it out. That's their job in the IDF, and they assign people roles. The paratroopers work a little bit differently. We're held to a little bit of a higher standard. So there's actually a paratrooper tryout that we have to
Mm.
go to. So I went to a tryout, and if I went to a tryout to see if I, could be
We
accepted.
qualified.
And yeah, as I qualified in my book, actually, the beginning of chapter 3 is a little bit of a snippet into the tryout and what I went through and the different exercises and tests. And then I essentially passed the tryouts and I was accepted into the paratroopers. And because of that, I became a paratrooper. If I didn't make it in, I would have requested the different units and I would have been placed wherever they placed me. Hopefully, my first option.
Right. All right. Well, so now you're a paratrooper, right? So, walking you through a little bit.
Yeah.
I guess I want to also ask, what's the pre-October 7th versus the after October 7th?
So,
What was it? Because Israel's always on a state of alert in some form, maybe not a very heightened, but and that was part of the challenge, I guess, also. But what was it like pre
yeah.
October 7th?
Well, it's a funny thing because it's funny you say that because Israel's always obviously in a heightened alert, like a heightened level of alertness, but there's obviously difference between post October 7th and pre-October 7th. But unlike say in America when you might say wartime and peacetime, in Israel they'll say like wartime and not wartime. So it's like not necessarily peace, but it's not a war. So prior to October 7th, we were obviously in like not wartime. So not peace, but not wartime. And the first 8 months of my service was training. So it was basically, I the English word is I'll say like a paratrooper in training. In Hebrew, there's like different terminology, but we train for 8 months before we officially become a paratrooper. So you're not officially that yet. And those 8 months include everything from learning how to shoot, learning how to fight as an individual, as a team, as an entire company, as an entire battalion, all of that type of stuff. You're learning, what it means to be a soldier. How do you conduct yourself? How do you act? What are the values of the IDF? You learn as a paratrooper how to jump out of the plane, and we were able to parachute 3 times, which was, I think, really cool. Some other people were definitely scared of heights, but we all did it, which was great. And then at the end of those 8 months, we had a ceremony. It's called the beret ceremony. We get a red beret, or in Hebrew, a kumta. That now you basically are said, I am officially a paratrooper in the IDF. And after that, we start our active service. And our active service during not wartime transitions between two different things. It transitions between training, because we always continue to train for the case that a war could happen. And we're then most of the time guarding. And guarding consists of being stationed in different regions throughout the country, doing like guard stands. We're at a post, watching. Sometimes it means being in a vehicle and patrolling an area, but essentially protecting the area. IDF soldiers and the paratroopers are either placed on the southern border of Gaza, the northern borders of either Lebanon or Syria, or anywhere throughout the West Bank or Judea and Samaria. So during my service, I was particularly in different areas of the West Bank, including for many months in the city of Hebron, which is the southern region there.
Yep.
And that was all prior towards to October 2nd. It was essentially, as I read in my book, constant what's it called, I guess resolving
Yep.
resolving between operational and training responsibilities.
Yeah, right. You rotate in and out of the situation.
Yeah, so we're always training and we're always guarding.
Okay, well then, then October 7th happened.
Then October 2nd.
I can't imagine what that looked like, felt like, and I'm just gonna let you walk us
Yeah.
through some of what you can share.
So I'll start by actually describing what I was doing the week before, because we were preparing for what is in Hebrew it's called a Targad or a Targil Gududi. In English translates to a battalion-wide war test or war simulation. It essentially is our test as a battalion to see how ready you, as the commander of our brigade says, the commander of the entire paratrooper says, we want to test each battalion on how ready you are for war. And so it's a test that actually only happens once every 8 months. And so the test that we had prior to that was in February of 23. And fast forward 8 months, the test is supposed to begin in October. And actually, not only in October, but it was supposed to begin on October 7th. It was Shabbat. Shabbat's a Jewish holiday, and it begins, sorry. Shabbat is a Jewish holiday, and it begins the night during the evening and ends the following evening. So we were supposed to begin on Saturday night, October 7th, in the fields, go out and do a war simulation. And it's a test that's so big that we're actually given an entire week beforehand to just prepare for the war test. Essentially, where they're saying next week you're going to war, this week do everything you need to do to prepare. That means making sure your gun works, making sure that your gun is clean, making sure that everyone on your team is on the same page, that what each person's role is, making sure that all your equipment is up to shape, that your bag is filled with all your equipment. And this was all done the week before October 7th. And in the morning, when the war started, we literally had everything prepared. We had a bag full of equipment, my gun working clean in the best shape that it could be as we went to do a real war, which is quite miraculous. And
Uh,
right? I mean, like,
yeah. The timing, how it worked out, and that's where your faith. I guess your faith really was we made sure that we were prepared, right? I mean,
yeah,
I don't know how you look at those things and don't tie those two together.
it was incredible. And like the readiness that we were. So on the morning of October 7th, we literally just had to pick up our equipment and go. And we you're gonna read a lot more in my book because I know all your
Yep.
listeners are gonna get my book and they're gonna read a lot of the details. But essentially, what happened is that we were in a base that wasn't close towards the Gaza, wasn't close to the Gaza envelope, and that Gaza envelope is obviously where the fighting took
Yep.
place on October 7th. We were airlifted on helicopters towards the region, and our helicopter was actually shot down right before we were about to land in the region. Hamas terrorists that entered Israel took a hand-propelled rocket,
Hmm.
like it's a anti-tank missile, and shot it at a helicopter. And we made an emergency landing in an open field in the Gaza envelope, escaped the helicopter, and we were directly in a battle.
Hmm.
We thought that we were going to go to the Gaza envelope, land, group up, and be given a task of this is where you're going, this is your operation, this is your mission. We there was none of that. We landed in a battle, got out of the helicopter, and there were terrorists about 100, 150 meters away from us, firing in our direction, and we get down on the ground and we start returning with fire. And this is how the war started for me. You often, it is so movie-like, and like it's hard to even describe in words now. I can tell you in the book I do a much better job because I had time to think of it and how to
Yeah.
explain
Yeah.
it.
No.
But you know, when you enter a war, usually I think we entered into the Gaza Strip later during the war. it's not done as smoothly like as you might think. It's done slowly, methodically, making sure everyone is safe, and you do it, there's operation behind it. What happened on October 7th was the most movie-like thing ever. We were A helicopter was shot midair. We make an emergency landing. We get onto this open field directly in combat with terrorists, and that's how it started. After all of that, we ended up moving to a kibbutz. Like, I don't know if your listeners know what a kibbutz is. A kibbutz is a small town in Israel. It's Kibbutzim vary in sizes from about like 500 to 2,000. That's like the biggest one. We ended up going to Kibbutz Be'eri. Be'eri had just over 1,000 residents in the kibbutz, and about 10%, just over 100 residents, were either killed or taken hostage on October 7th. It became one of the epicenters of the October 7th massacre, and my unit was there on the scene, fighting terrorists that day and then rescuing families from their homes.
Wow. So, you know, wow. Just can't imagine it. You're saying it so calmly, and I can't imagine what the experience is. I've worked with veterans, uh, and heard stories like this, but in those situations, they knew what they were walking into. I mean, you sort of knew very quickly what you were walking into, but the sights and experiences
Yeah.
probably were overwhelming. But
And like, I'll tell you, we really like. I know it's shocking to hear, but we had no idea what we were walking into. In hindsight, you could say, "Well, how did you know? Like, didn't you understand what was happening?" We didn't have our phones on us. We didn't
right,
give in our phone. We gave in our phones that morning before we got in the helicopters. Everything we saw and knew about October 7th on that day and the days after was just what we saw with our own eyes. And it shows also sometimes how in it and how out of it you could be because if there was something like another massacre at a different community happening down the road, I had no idea what was happening. If you were watching the news, you probably would like hear about it. I didn't. I didn't know anything. We were going to Be'eri, this community. We had no idea what we were walking into. I'm being genuine when I say that. And only while we were there did we start to grasp it. And I'll finally say to that, I don't think anyone in Israel or anyone around the world could have ever expected what happened on October 7th. And so therefore it wasn't even a thought of ours when we were walking in. Because how can you imagine yourself walking into something that you couldn't even imagine
yeah,
beforehand?
yeah, right. That was the thing. Watching it from the safety of my home, uh, just hearing all those things and seeing those things, and how overwhelming it was just to hear about it. But you were there, and without your phones, I didn't know that. And without limited communication, and because of the size of the attack, everybody, so even command, from what I've read and heard,
Yeah,
didn't have all the information. They were still information coming in. It wasn't, it was, in a way, it was a perfect plan on their part. Uh, you know, it's like another blitzkrieg from World War II, right? It was, unexpected and really as fierce as it could have been.
yeah.
Yeah.
It
So,
was,
uh, I mean, I don't know. You have a book full of stuff. I don't know how much you want to go into detail about that, but I'm sure over the time there was a lot of things that you had to learn how to deal with on the ground. Just even the mental pieces of it. Again, I've worked with people who've gone through those traumatic events. How have you been dealing with that?
you're saying now afterwards?
Yeah, or even during. So
Yeah. I can tell you that during everything, you feel that you're not in normal times, that that this is the reality that you're dealing with. And what's so amazing is that you're with your guys and you're with people who understand it and are going through the same thing as you, that the throughout the entire war, I kept on thinking like this is horrible, but thank God I'm with people who care about me, who love me, and all I had in my mind were the hostages. Because the
mhm.
hostages that were taken on October 7th were underground. many of them alone. The only people around them were their captors who were torturing them. And I said, this is like, first of all, I'm here for them. I'm here to make sure they can come home. But also, I'm a little bit lucky that I get to be around people who care about me and who want me to be safe and not to torture and kill me. But after I finish my service, then you snap back into the real reality because you realize that everything you just went through over the last, I served in the war for about half a year. All of that felt normal because that was my reality for half a year. But then you snap back into reality. I came back eventually to New York and to Long Island. And let's just say Long Island and Gaza, the only thing similar is that it's not that big. Um, you come back to Long Island and you're suddenly having to learn how to, you know, going back to normal life and starting to actually care about things that you didn't care about. For example, I'm a huge sports guy. I grew up on sports, love following sports. During the war, I couldn't tell you, I couldn't care less who was winning the Super Bowl that year. Like because why would you? You're in a war. You're fighting for hostages who are underground. People died. You could die at any moment. Why would you care about that? And I remember coming home and we would watch sports with some friends or family friends. And I just sit there. I was like, I don't care. Like a year ago, I would have cared, but it was like a hard thing to come back to because,
Sure. Well,
I need to get a little bit retrain myself to care about the little things in life after going through all of that. And I'll also say my return home to America was a little bit easier, I think, than most because I'm so fortunate to have grown up in a community, as I was talking about in the beginning of the podcast, a community that loves me, that understands me. I grew up in a community that understood what Judaism and Israel means to us. And because of all of that, when I came home, I was embraced by such love. I was I was welcomed home. I didn't want it. I didn't expect it. I didn't want the hero's welcome. And I didn't want anyone to call me a hero. Like I truly didn't. But I came home to people saying like kol hakavod, thank you, like big respects to you, and it makes me feel good. It makes me feel that I'm not coming home alone. I'm coming home to people who are looking out for me throughout the past few years, and now are happy that I'm here and wanted me to succeed in my next endeavors in life.
yeah, no, I could imagine this. That's the biggest challenge that most veterans have are that they're coming home, right? The military is really good, and our military and
Yeah,
sounds like the Israel military really good about training you, to
yeah,
be a warrior and to be prepared for those things. But the transition back home has always been, and that's part of the PTSD that comes back after you've seen some things that none of us could imagine, you know, seeing it live. In a movie, it could trigger you, but in a movie, you go home and you're in safety, or even watching those things in
you turn off
safety.
the TV.
Versus,
You turn off the TV and it's
yeah,
done.
yeah, but where when you're living it day by day. So how's your transition been? So you were welcome back home, of course,
Yeah,
and how is that? Do you notice? Besides, have you gotten back to yourself to enjoy watching sports, or is it
yes.
still good?
So I'll share a little thing that. So one of my childhood friends, his name is Omer Nutra. Omer was one of the 251 hostages taken on
Mhm.
October 7th. He also, just like me, he grew up in Plainview, Long Island. We were in the same school together. We went to the same synagogue. More than that, our families were very close. We were very close family friends, and because of that, Omer and I became very close friends. He was taken on October 7th. He was hostage in Gaza. And so the big reason really why I feel like I couldn't focus on the mundane things in life is because how can I watch, a Knicks game and
Mm.
care? Now I care about the Knicks. Now we're in the semifinals and we just whooped the Sixers.
Philadelphia,
But
yep.
but 2 years ago, not the Knicks weren't as good back then. They were good last year, but how can I care about that when my friend is underground? He's a hostage. Like it's
Sure.
like we're not talking that. this is like a real life thing, and sports is not as important. About a year and 2 months after October 7th, we heard that the IDF was able to conclude that Omer was actually killed on October 7th by Hamas, and his body was taken as hostage. And so from the start of the war, we were basically ended up being fighting for his body to come home, so his family could bury him and get him a proper funeral that he deserves.
Right.
And we weren't praying anymore for Omer to come home alive. And as sad as it was, and as much as we hoped that Omer would come home alive, it also changed the outlook that I knew that at every step I take in my life, because before that, when I thought Omer was alive, I said, every sip of water, every time I take a shower, every time I'm talking to a friend, talking to my mom, talking to my dad, Omer is underground suffering. And when he was pronounced to be dead,
Right.
it's almost like this a little bit of a sigh of like, at least I know he's not suffering. At least I know during this entire time he's not in. Now when I take a sip of water, I won't be thinking that the water that he's not being able to drink. And the year after that, on November 2nd of 2025, just about half the year ago, Omer's body was brought back
Yeah.
for burial. And so it changed a lot. And like seriously, I say that it really, now that I know that Omer's home, and all the hostages are home. Every single living and deceased hostage has been brought back to their family. I can finally like say to myself, like now I can start enjoying
Right.
you know,
There's some of that survivor guilt that
yeah,
comes along
for
with that,
sure.
for
I'm
sure.
like 100%. Listen, I and a lot of my friends in the army could have died on many different occasions. And the fact that we didn't is we're fortunate. And it's also it makes you wonder, what could have been, and it makes you also, feel sad at the fact that I'm here and that they're not.
Yeah. No, I can imagine that. All right. I don't want to take a lot more time. I know there's a whole book for us to read, and I can't wait
Hold up.
to get my comic, and I'd love to reach out. One of the things I can offer is if there's any sort of stuff, and I'm sure you're well supported, mental health wise, but I've worked with veterans and helped them with uh
Thank you.
overcoming some of those challenges. But also, so I want to end this on a more positive note.
Yeah, for sure.
Out of all of this, so your book is an inspiration to what we do and the things that we're called for. I want you to walk into my magic garden. And what's one thing that you would love to put out into the universe in terms of a positive message related to your experience and your book?
Yeah. Um, I'd share how lucky we are and how fortunate we are because we can always look at the negatives in life, but I don't know if most of your listeners will be Jewish or not Jewish, but what I will share is that for the Jewish people, we feel like we're living in a lucky time to have the country, to have the home that we can call ours. And I felt so fortunate to be able to protect it, to be able to also be there in Israel's toughest moments when we needed it most. And it's really, as much as there's hate in the world and there's a lot of anti-Semitism, and truly anti-Semitism is on the rise in America and throughout the world, we should also be grateful for what we have and how 2026 is a good time to be alive. And I'm fortunate.
Well, I'm glad that you're alive, and thank you. How can we for the I'll put it in the show notes as well, but how can we contact you or to get a
Yeah,
copy of your book?
for sure. So I wrote a book. It's called Once a Paratrooper, The Story of the Lone Soldier in the Gaza War. It's a memoir. It tells my story. What I mentioned on this podcast, it goes into all of that and a lot more. You can find it on Amazon, and we're going to put the Amazon link in the podcast. And we're also going to be putting my website in the podcast as well. And through the website, you can contact me. Just send me an email, click on the contact button. I'm also going around, I'm doing book events. I'm speaking about my story and bringing my book to different types of communities all over. So that's something that interests you as well. please contact me. And I'd love to come to your group, to your community. And my goal is to get this book in the hands of as many readers as possible. So I want to thank you, David, for inviting me on your podcast and to be able to share a little bit about my love for Israel, everything that I went through in the army. And I want to thank your listeners for being with us, for supporting me and supporting my book and supporting my story and supporting the great story that we all have to share.
Well, thank you so much, and really, you've inspired me today. I've always held my faith uh, very strongly, and stood up in places where I didn't need to be a proud Jew. But thank you for doing all the things that you've done, and I wish you only all the peace and health in your future. And we'll do our best to get as many eyes and ears on your book as possible, because that's the real truths that we need to share with the world.
Thanks, David. I appreciate it. Thank you for all you do.
And for everybody else, as always, peace and love is brought into the world, and I hope you receive a lot of that. And when you bring a bat, remember it's being awesome today. I hope you have an awesome day and hit your sweet spot. Thank you so much, and have a great day.